This is the real story of the Beatles' attempt to fool the entire world about what really happened with their original drummer, Pete Best. It all begins on September 20th, 1961. A customer at the Beatles' hangout at the Grapes in Liverpool overhears a conversation after the band's Cavern Club appearance that night. When drummer Pete Best leaves the room to urinate in the alley, John Lennon, George Harrison, and Paul McCartney discuss the possibility of getting Pete out of the band. John dislikes his haircut. Paul hates how he's getting all the girls, while George states that he's glad they want to get rid of someone in the band other than himself. The wheel is set in motion. December 13th, 1961. During a lunchtime appearance at the Cavern Club, a friend of John's hears Paul, George, and John discussing Pete in the dark alley before they go on stage. The three consider throwing Pete off Albert Dock on Liverpool's waterfront and selling his drum kit to buy uppers. John is quite keen on the idea, saying he can't get enough prellies to keep himself awake on stage. Paul gets nervous and nixes the plan. The eyewitness wanders up to John and says hello. John reacts with a sneer, saying only, "Sod off, you wanker." May 31st, 1962. Pete fails to cut his hair in what has become the new Beatles style. John, Paul, and George are furious. According to an unwritten memoir of George Harrison, the band rigs Pete's drum kit to explode during their final date at the Star Club in Hamburg, Germany. The explosive fails to detonate. Pete finds the device while packing up. John smirks and says,
"That's all to show you. Don't want to cut your sodding hair like us. How's that make you feel?"
Pete again refuses to adopt the Beatles' haircut and seals his fate. June 6, 1962. The Beatles play 4 demo songs for producer George Martin at Abbey Road Studios in London. Red-faced after George makes fun of his tie, Martin tells John, Paul, and George,
"You need to get rid of your drummer. I could make a phone call and he'll never play drums again. I could make another phone call and he'll never be able to make it back to Liverpool. On the other hand, you could just sack him. Lads, I leave it to you."
Martin also threatens George to never joke about his tie again. August 16th, 1962. Pete is dismissed from the group and replaced by Ringo Starr. Uncollected eyewitness accounts state Pete leaves manager Brian Epstein's office at NIMS Enterprises with Brian yelling after him,
"Look, just be glad they didn't want you dead. It was on the table, Pete. It was on the bloody table."
Within 18 months, the Beatles become world famous. And as their fame increases, the situation for Pete Best grows worse. Eventually, he is reduced to sweeping up after circus elephants. August 29th, 1966. An angry Pete meets the Beatles backstage after what would prove to be their final concert appearance at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. According to a janitor's debunked memoir, John, Paul, and George nervously confront Pete. Pete demands the Beatles stop touring immediately or he'll blow the lid off the whole conspiracy. The band is furious. Pete laughs, saying that if the band doesn't tour, the public will forget them. The band quickly promises Pete they will never tour again. Paul is particularly alarmed. October 4th, 1966. Ringo meets John in Spain, where he is on location for a part in the movie How I Won the War. Paul and George arrive as well. A waiter in a restaurant overhears their meeting. Paul soon becomes frantic and cracks, saying he is going to tell the world about their aborted plans to kill Pete Best. After Paul leaves, John, George, and Ringo decide Paul must be taken care of. They agree on a plan. February 1967. John, George, and Ringo pressure Beatles tour manager Neil Aspinall to take out Paul by cutting the brakes on his car. Unbeknownst to them, Aspinall has already been engaged by Paul's girlfriend, Jane Asher, to kill Paul due to his many, many infidelities. Collecting fees from the Beatles and Asher, Aspinall tampers with Paul's car. Paul is killed in a terrible accident on a country road outside London, and the band installs a replacement that they had been training for months. Asher is pleased with Paul's substitute and agrees to remain silent. Spring 1968. Although Paul breaks up with Jane Asher, 2 weeks later, Asher meets Pete Best at a posh London nightclub and the two begin a secret affair. Pete reveals to her the assassination scheme against him, while Asher tells him about the faux Paul. Realizing an amazing opportunity, the two hatch a scheme to blackmail the Beatles for more than $200 million. August 13th, 1968. Near midnight, Pete and Jane Asher confront the Beatles at Abbey Road Studios as they work on the song Your Blues for the White Album. After much shouting, the band agrees to pay the blackmail. The band decides that the highly successful Apple Corps, a company formed by the band, will have to take the fall to pay Pete and Jane Asher. As the months go by, Apple suffers large losses blamed on incompetence and bad accounting. In reality, the blackmail demanded by Pete and Asher is the cause. January 2nd, 1969. According to a disgruntled ex-employee of Apple, days before the band is to begin filming the documentary Let It Be, Pete confronts John, George, and Ringo and the faux Paul. He demands more clues be placed in Beatles songs about the real Paul's death. If he doesn't see them show up, Pete says he will demand that the band break up by 1970. Shaken, the band goes before the motion picture cameras at London's Twickenham Studios. Their infighting is blamed on tension within the band. In fact, Pete's threats have them scared. Feeling cocky, Pete blackmails Asher into total silence and takes her share. Early 1970. Beaten down by Pete's blackmail threats, the band breaks up. Satisfied, Pete goes his own way. There you have it. The untold story that ties together all the loose ends. Of course, the media will never print the story, but you know what really happened.